let's have a chat about what is happening in the Brisbane market. Obviously there's a lot going on globally, locally. The media has a lot to say, but I am a local Brisbane buyer's agent, and I just wanted to talk to you about what we're actually seeing on the ground, to give buyers a little bit more insight and help you make decisions confidently, because obviously we can all read articles, but is it the reality of what's actually happening? Some yes, some no. So I guess where we start is the start of the Iran war. Now, when that started, we did notice quite a big shift in the market immediately, because along with that war starting, we also had the rise in fuel prices. So that was all people talked about for quite some time. I don't think I've heard about it for about a month now, but it definitely was a big talking point, especially anybody that owned a diesel car. So with that war starting, fuel prices going up, the biggest or probably first thing that I really noticed in the market was auctions. So auctions really started to slow down. We weren't seeing as many people register. There was nobody registered at all, which a couple of weeks before there would have been, multiple people bidding on that property. But yeah, we were seeing maybe one person registering, lots of properties passing in, and just going into negotiations. So that was a really big shift in the market, where auctions had been quite competitive before then. Now, the reason for this shift is when there is some uncertainty, especially economically, fuel prices were going up, the cost of everything is going up. People want some certainty and some protection. So with an auction, you're buying that property cash unconditional. That is locked in. You are just moving forward to settlement. So people or buyers really wanted to make sure that they were protected. So going to an auction wasn't that beneficial for them at that time with the protections that they wanted. So by these properties passing in and going into negotiations, it allowed buyers to then put in conditions to that contract, like a finance condition, to enable them to actually move forward in a protected way. So that was a big shift, and completely understandable. In times of uncertainty, you really need to make sure that you're protected. So that was a big change in the market. We are still seeing a lot of properties sell via auction, and whether it's they sell on the day under the hammer, or they go into negotiations and sell, later that day or a couple of days later, properties are still selling that way, but it's definitely slower than it was before. Now, the other big thing that we saw was for investors. Now, around this same time, maybe a couple of weeks before that the war started, we also started to get leaked information about the federal budget and the changes with capital gains and negative gearing. So once that information sort of started to trickle through, investors did start to get a little bit wary about whether they should proceed or whether they should hold off. Now, with that, we saw a slight shift right then, back at that time. But as we got closer to the budget, it definitely got to the point where more and more investors were just sitting on the fence and waiting. Now, once we had that budget announcement, we saw a complete shift and investors just stopped. So they now had the information, but we were waiting for the finer detail, which still hasn't been released, on exactly what each of these things mean for capital gains and negative gearing changes. And they're just sort of waiting on all those details to come out, so then they can sit with their accountant and see what the best process will be for moving forward, best structures, how they're going to mitigate these changes. So they're sort of on pause right now, and just waiting for information. So that's been a huge shift in the market. What that means for the rest of the market is investors are kind of out right now. So we had a lot of investors in Brisbane. Anything that a first home buyer was typically looking at, which we as buyers agents at Vesta work with a lot of first home buyers, we're typically competing against investors. because it's a similar price point to get into that market. We're looking at those entry-level houses and then units, townhouses. So big shift in that market, where once the investors have pulled back, it means that there's a lot more opportunity for first home buyers or owner occupiers in general. So that's been, I think, a real positive for the owner occupier market, for that first home buyer market, meaning that there is less competition. Now, when one segment of the market does pull back, that does give the whole market some uncertainty. So I have noticed where, you know, open homes there should be, and there typically has been, say a 2-bedroom apartment, 35 groups through. That would be just a typical normal open home. Now we're seeing maximum 5. Like, the numbers have dropped significantly, and there's no way that all of those 35 before were investors. Like, it was a mix of investors and owner occupiers. So I think it's just happened where investors have pulled back. There's a lot happening economically, there's a lot happening in the world, and that sort of made the whole buyer demographic a little bit uncertain, a little bit indecisive, which is understandable. However, I would say with owner occupiers, especially first home buyers, all I have heard for the last 6 years, pretty much since COVID started, or the peak COVID market, when we're rising, first home buyers have been asking for a break. They've been asking for room to breathe, some breathing space so they can take time to make decisions. They've been asking for prices to drop a little bit so they don't have to absolutely push themselves to the limit of their budget. This is that time. So this last month, May, the Brisbane market dwelling prices went up 0.8%. Now that is lower than what it has been. April was 1.2, March was 1.8. So as you can see, it's trending down. We're still moving up, but it is stabilizing. So that's going to give that opportunity to first home buyers to get into the market in a bit more of a stable way. They're not having to compete against a crazy number of other offers to get into the property they want. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get a bargain, but it does mean that you're not going to have to pay way over just to secure the property. We just secured a unit in a city sub 1 million, and there were only 2 other offers on the table. Now, a couple of months ago, that would have been absolutely unheard of, because we would have had probably 15, 20 other offers on the table. And not to say that all of those were super competitive, but we are competing against a higher number of people, which means that we need to make sure that our offer is so strong in order to secure that property for our client. Now we have less, we've got a little bit more bargaining power. We've got, you know, the ability to put in more conditions. You know, we always make sure that we protect our clients with the conditions that we put in, but it just means that we can, you know, maybe do a longer finance term, maybe, you know, can do a subject to sale clause or something like that, where before it just would have been, we wouldn't have been competitive enough to be able to put that in. Now sellers are that little bit more flexible, there's less offers on the table, so they're willing to work with buyers. So I think that's quite a positive outcome for owner occupiers, especially first home buyers, because it has been overwhelming and it has been really hard as somebody who works with a lot of first home buyers, seeing what those buyers have to put themselves through to secure a property and really push themselves to the limit. It is actually really positive to see that it has shifted in this way and becoming a bit more balanced. So that's pretty much what we're seeing at the moment in the market. That's what's happening in Brisbane. If you do have any questions about anything about the Brisbane property market, feel free to reach out. You can put it in the comments. We're always happy to have a discussion and let you know exactly what we're seeing.